A final day of justice. That's what the Maricopa County attorney called the execution of Richard Djerf. This marks the state's second execution in 2025, following a years-long break.
Today should be about the members of the Luna family.
The heinous crimes of Richard Djerf on the minds of many Friday.
Defendant is guilty of first-degree murder of Damien Lumina.
Djerf sat on death row for decades after pleading guilty to the murders of 4 family members back in 1993. ABC 15 dug back in our archives, finding footage of the crime scene. Djerf pretending to deliver flowers to a Phoenix home before killing Albert Luna Sr., his wife Patricia, their 18-year-old daughter Rochelle, and their 5-year-old son Damien.
It is ordered that the defendant, Richard Kenneth Djerf, shall suffer the penalty of death.
Djerf blaming another Luna family member for an earlier theft. In a handwritten note released last month, Djerf said he became obsessed with vengeance.
At 10:23, the death warrant was read, and that's when he was asked if he had any last words. He said, "I do not."
The Arizona Department of Corrections, Rehabilitation and Reentry Deputy Director saying Friday went according to policy and procedure.
Mr. Djerf was pronounced dead at 10:40 a.m.
Media witnesses describing in detail the process.
These IVs were put in and removed several times. I counted 4. They were having a really difficult time finding a suitable vein to administer the needle. That was clear.
Noting it took about 9 minutes to get both IVs successfully in place.
That was the only speed bump in carrying out this.
The IV process has been closely watched following other executions where the team struggled. Changes were recently made, including expanding the IV team and requiring quarterly training.
And at that point, I noticed several noises from Djerf, including sort of a grunting sound and a puffing breath.
While the state attorney general and ADCRR staff did not take questions, media witnesses did. There are people that have been critical of this process and in the past expressed concerns over things like heavy breathing.
By the time the process actually started, it felt very peaceful. I kept describing it as clinical because that's how it felt.
That letter, written previously by Djerf, expressed remorse, saying he hopes his death brings some measure of peace. No representatives for the Luna family were at the execution or the press conference after. In Florence, Ashley Holden, ABC 15, Arizona.
October 17, 2025. After 32 years on Arizona death row for brutally murdering 4 members of the Luna family, including 18-year-old Rochelle, whom he raped and killed, 5-year-old Damien shot execution style, and parents Albert and Patricia, Richard Kenneth Djerf, age 55, ate his final meal of a double cheeseburger, onion rings, and cherry pie. He declined to make any last statement, took a few heavy breaths, and began snoring as lethal injection ended his life at 10:40 a.m. This is the story of revenge turned to mass murder, a killer who represented himself in court to plead guilty, and the final 24 hours of one of Arizona's most notorious death row inmates. September 14, 1993. A Phoenix, Arizona home became the scene of one of the state's most horrific family annihilations. Richard Kenneth Djerf, 55, died by lethal injection at 10:40 a.m. local time for the killings of Albert Luna Sr. and Patricia Luna, their daughter Rochelle Luna, 18, and son, Damien Luna, 5, at their home on September 14, 1993. 4 people would die that day in a calculated act of revenge that would shock Arizona and lead to one of the state's most notorious death penalty cases. To understand what happened that day, you need to understand Richard Kenneth Djerf's motive. Djerf stated that his motive for the murders he committed was revenge for an alleged home robbery of Djerf's residence committed by Albert Luna Jr., a former friend of his whom he met when they were working as night custodians at a Safeway supermarket. In January 1993, Albert Luna Jr. stole several electronic items, among them a cassette player and an AK-47 rifle from Djerf's apartment. Originally, Djerf contacted police to report the robbery, but decided to commit personal revenge for the home invasion upon being frustrated by police inaction. Djerf became obsessed with revenge. For 8 months, he planned how he would make Albert Luna Jr. pay for stealing from him. But when Djerf showed up at the Luna family home on September 14, 1993, claiming to be delivering flowers, Albert Jr. wasn't there. Only his family was home. What happened next was a reign of terror that would destroy an entire family. On September 14, 1993, Djerf showed up at the Luna home with flowers and then forced himself in at gunpoint. Patricia Luna and her son Damien Luna were at home. Holding Damien hostage, Djerf then forced Patricia to load several items owned by the Luna household into his car. He then repeatedly asked Patricia whether she wanted her or Damien to die first, and also questioned her about the whereabouts of Albert Luna Sr. He then secured Mrs. Luna and her son by tying their arms and legs and gagging them. Patricia and 5-year-old Damien were tied to kitchen chairs, gagged, and left helpless as Djerf waited for other family members to return home. When their daughter Rochelle Luna arrived at around 3 p.m., Djerf took her to her bedroom, where he gagged her with tissue paper and tape, raped and killed her by stabbing her in the throat. 18-year-old Rochelle came home not knowing a killer was waiting inside. Djerf dragged her to her bedroom, sexually assaulted her, and then murdered her by slashing her throat. Djerf then returned downstairs and informed Patricia he had murdered her daughter. Patricia Luna, still bound and gagged, learned that her daughter had been raped and killed while she sat helpless, unable to save her. When Albert Luna Sr. arrived home at around 4 p.m., Djerf forced him into his bedroom at gunpoint. Djerf handcuffed Albert Sr. to a bed, smashed his head with a baseball bat, and then removed the handcuffs, believing Albert Sr. to be dead. But Albert Luna Sr. was not dead. Despite being beaten with a baseball bat, he regained consciousness and fought back. Mr. Luna regained consciousness and charged Djerf with a pocket knife, wounding him. Djerf stabbed Albert Sr. through the arm before reaching for his Beretta pistol and shooting Albert Sr. 6 times. Albert Luna Sr. died trying to defend his family. He wounded Djerf in the struggle, but Djerf shot him 6 times with a Beretta pistol, killing him. With Albert Sr. dead, Djerf returned to the kitchen where Patricia and 5-year-old Damien remained tied to chairs. What happened next revealed the depths of Djerf's cruelty. He then asked Patricia, "Do you want to watch your kid die, or do you want your kid to watch you die?" Then shot Patricia and Damien in the head at close range. Before he left, Djerf sprinkled gasoline on the bodies and around the house. He then turned on the stove and left a pizza box and a rag on the burner in an unsuccessful arson attempt. Djerf tried to burn down the house to destroy evidence, but the fire didn't catch. He left 4 bodies behind and drove away in the Luna family car. What Djerf did next would lead directly to his arrest. He went to the hospital claiming he had been robbed and stabbed by 2 men, seeking treatment for the wound Albert Luna Sr. had inflicted during their struggle. But Djerf couldn't keep quiet about what he had done. Djerf confessed the Luna family murders in detail to his girlfriend on September 15, citing that it was really awesome and you should have been there. In the following days, Djerf bragged about the murders to multiple other friends, eventually leading to a police report and subsequent arrest on September 18. Djerf had bragged to multiple people about murdering an entire family, calling it awesome. Those people reported him to police, leading to his arrest just 4 days after the murders. Phoenix police executed search warrants on Djerf's apartment, car, and motel room, finding multiple items stolen from the Luna household, along with the murder weapons. The evidence was overwhelming. Stolen property from the Luna home, the murder weapons, the Luna family car, Djerf's own confessions to multiple people. There was no question about his guilt. On October 29, 1993, while being held without bond in confinement, Djerf tried committing suicide by slashing his wrists with a shank forged from electronic parts of a Halloween card he had received. While awaiting trial, Djerf attempted suicide but survived. He would face trial for 4 counts of first-degree murder. Richard Djerf's case became notable not just for the horrific nature of his crimes, but for how he handled his legal defense. Under a Rule 11 law, Djerf insisted on his right to fire his legal counsel and represent himself. Djerf had to fight for the right to legally represent himself in court so that he could forego a trial and enter a guilty plea. Djerf fired his attorneys and chose to represent himself. His goal was not to fight the charges, It was to plead guilty and accept the death penalty. Djerf admitted to the crimes and pled guilty to 4 charges of first-degree murder at trial on August 16, 1995, as part of a plea agreement, in exchange for a dismissal of all other charges. On August 16, 1995, Richard Djerf pleaded guilty to murdering Albert Luna Sr., Patricia Luna, Rochelle Luna, and Damien Luna. He was sentenced to death on May 22, 1996. Richard Kenneth Djerf spent 29 years on Arizona death row. As of April 2021, Djerf was one of the 20 Arizona death row inmates who had exhausted all appeals at that time. By 2025, Djerf had exhausted all his appeals. He had a choice: continue fighting for his life through clemency petitions, or accept his fate. In a handwritten statement released in September 2025, Djerf made his decision clear. "If I can't find reason to spare my life, what reason would anyone else have?" he wrote. "I hope my death brings some measure of peace." "There are no words to undo what I did," Djerf wrote. "I've carried that weight for 32 years, and I know the pain I caused can never be taken back. I am sorry." Djerf would not fight his execution. He apologized for his crimes and accepted that he deserved to die for what he had done. On October 16, 2025, Richard Djerf spent his final full day alive. Death row inmates scheduled for execution are moved to a holding cell near the execution chamber the day before their scheduled death. Djerf was allowed visits from family members, spiritual advisors, and attorneys during his final hours. Records don't indicate who, if anyone, visited him that day. He was also allowed to request a final meal. The Arizona Department of Corrections, Rehabilitation and Reentry, ADCR, had confirmed Djerf's final meal was a double cheeseburger with lettuce and tomato, onion rings with ketchup, and a piece of cherry pie with whipped cream. He also guzzled down a 20-ounce Pepsi with ice. The meal was served on October 16, the evening before his execution. Djerf ate his final meal knowing that in less than 24 hours he would be dead. October 17, 2025. Execution Day. The execution was scheduled for 10 a.m. at the Arizona State Prison Complex in Florence. Family members of the victims are expected to attend the execution, while anti-death penalty groups plan a candlelight vigil outside the prison gates. Outside the prison, 2 groups gathered. Anti-death penalty activists held a vigil opposing the execution. Family members of the Luna victims came to witness justice being served after 32 years. In his statement released Thursday, Djerf said Albert Jr. was an innocent victim who came home to discover what Djerf had done to his family. "No part of what I did to his family or why was ever his fault," Djerf wrote. Albert Luna Jr., the person Djerf had blamed for the theft that sparked his revenge, had come home that day in 1993 to find his entire family murdered. He had lived with that trauma for 32 years. Today, he would see his family's killer face justice. At approximately 9:50 a.m., Richard Djerf was escorted from his holding cell to the execution chamber. Prison staff explained the procedure to him and asked if he had any final requests. Djerf was strapped to a gurney with leather restraints. The execution team, which included medical doctors and a phlebotomist, prepared the 4 lines that would deliver the lethal injection. It took about 10 minutes for the execution team to insert the 4 lines into his veins so the drugs could be administered. Barcello said Djerf's veins were not optimal, and it required a few attempts to successfully place the 4. The 4 insertion took longer than usual because Djerf's veins were difficult to access. But at 10:05 a.m., the lines were successfully placed and ready to deliver the pentobarbital. Arizona uses a single drug protocol for executions, pentobarbital, a barbiturate that causes unconsciousness followed by respiratory and cardiac arrest. Before the execution could proceed, the warden asked Djerf if he had any final statement. This is the moment when condemned inmates can speak their final words, apologize to victims' families, or make peace with their fate. Djerf declined to make any last statement. Despite writing an apology statement a month earlier, Richard Djerf chose silence in his final moments. He offered no last words, no final message, nothing. He did not put up any resistance but took a few heavy breaths. At 10:05 a.m., the first dose of pentobarbital began flowing into Djerf's veins. He did not put up any resistance but took a few heavy breaths and emitted a brief snoring sound after the lethal drugs were administered. After the first of 2 pentobarbital shots were given, he made several sounds, including a grunt and puffing sound. Witnesses reported that Djerf took several deep breaths, made grunting and puffing sounds, and then began snoring as the pentobarbital took effect. The snoring was an involuntary response as his respiratory system began shutting down. About 15 minutes elapsed between the first pentobarbital shot and the declaration that he was dead. At 10:20 a.m., the second dose of pentobarbital was administered. Within minutes, all signs of life ceased. He was pronounced dead at 10:40 a.m. At 10:40 a.m. on October 17, 2025, Richard Kenneth Djerf was pronounced dead. He was 55 years old. He had spent 32 years paying for the murders of 4 innocent people. After the execution, Arizona Department of Corrections Deputy Director John Barcello held a press conference. By all accounts, the process went according to plan and without any incident, Barcello said.